Okay, good afternoon. I'm sure people will roll on in as the afternoon goes by. My name's Greg Freeman. I'm the facilitator of this afternoon. And we have 5 esteemed consultants here, and we're just going to work through a process which obviously will involve the audience, and I'll explain that as we go along. But we have, working from the end, Anne Prince, right? APC Waste Consultants. We have Ronan Cullen from Talis Consultants. We have Richard Collins from Arcadis. Mike Ritchie. And Miles Mason. It's funny, they probably feel a bit uncomfortable up here, which is a good thing. This is a good thing. And if Mike says that it's uncomfortable, it is uncomfortable. So the idea of running this, it's just to highlight what consultants do, how they're different to each other, and how they approach problem solving, I think, which is the important thing of why we engage consultants. And I think, just to kick off, what I'd like to ask them each, maybe just starting with you, Anne, is just a bit of your background, history, how you ended up here, just as you as an individual and also with your business, you know, just a very quick intro to you and your business.
So I'm the old veteran of the industry. How I got here, I guess, was I spent 10 years working in local government. I worked with the Keep Australia Beautiful Council for a couple of years. I then led a program called Recycle Sydney, Recycle New South Wales, went overseas, worked overseas in Europe and in Asia, came back, looked around at the landscape, and after having worked for a couple of big corporates, decided I really didn't want to do that gig anymore and started my own consulting practice. I didn't have a business plan, I didn't have an exit plan. I just put my head down and went for it, I guess. And the timing is everything. So at the time I started my own consulting practice, the New South Wales Waste Boards were just being established. There was a load of work and they had all to do plans and programs. Everyone was, there was a lot of activity happening in a very short space of time and not a lot of arms and legs on the ground. So the Waste Boards needed support, and that was sort of the background to how I got here. 27 years later, I'm still here. I love the industry. I love everything about consulting. You are master of everything. You know a little bit about a lot of things, but the main thing is you have a great network and you know where to go and get answers if you don't know the answer. If you don't know the answer, you know who to talk to or where to go and try to get the answer. So that's how I got here.
Thanks, Anne. Ronan?
Yep, cheers, thanks. Yeah, guys, Ronan Cullen from Talis Consultants. Yeah, my story, well, I've always been a waste consultant. Started back in Ireland, as you may have guessed. I'm not Australian by birth, but Australian now, and a West Australian as well, which we'll speak probably about later on. Yeah, my first job in university, I was still in university finishing off, and I was brought into the office of RPS, or MC O'Sullivan, which is RPS, which is probably the biggest waste consultancy in Ireland and the UK at the time, and my job was to start working in the library, because in those days a lot of reports were still going out hard copy, drawings, designs, so on and so forth, and of course we had a big library room, and that was my job. And before I knew it, I was getting dragged into projects, site works, reports, so on and so forth, which has been before I qualified, and then stayed with them for a few years and came to Australia. And actually David Gamble, and obviously with GHD, one of the big heavyweights in the waste consultancy game, gave me a job, and a few weeks later he told me he was going to Perth, and I didn't even know where that was at the time, in fairness. My geography of Australia was on the east coast, as a backpacker I was, and went there and then joined Cardno. So I worked with a lot of the bigger firms over the years, and I think learned a lot from those bigger firms. And then myself and another 3 fellow directors of Talis, 14 years ago started planning, setting up Talis, and 13 years ago executed that. And with a real mindset of bringing end-to-end services in the consultancy game, strategy work, particularly at Cardno, we did a lot of strategy-based work, but our engineers, who were really road engineers and didn't really like messing with our waste projects, to be honest with you, we were dragging them in. Well, at Talis, we set up a mindset of really delivering waste infrastructure projects and bringing engineers who worked dedicated on waste projects. So, yeah, that's myself and Talis, really, yeah.
Thanks, Ronan. Richard?
Nice one. Richard Collins, Arcadis Consulting. Firstly, apologies. They invited one of my other members, a female, in my team who was a late apology, so our gender bias is not really reflective, I think, of the consulting world in our game. There is a lot of amazing women who do consulting work in circular economy, waste advisory work. Anyway, so you could call me Tanya, but I'm Richard. I got into this about 10 years ago, having bookended the back a journalism career. So I was working for WME magazine as the editor of that, which was a sustainable business magazine, and we launched Inside Waste magazine in 2003, I think, or 4. So I did 15 years or so in the journalism world. So to Anne's point about knowing who to talk to and where to go and having a breadth, but not necessarily the depth, that's what journalism brought to me. And then I jumped across to HIDA, which quickly became Arcadis when it was acquired globally in 2015. And, kind of, again, it's a very similar process. Talk to a lot of people, do your analysis, and then, get your output, a written report or whatever that might be. Arcadis is a global company, on 5 continents, 35,000 people. Sounds impressive, but we're 13 people in Australia in my business, a circular economy waste advisory, across Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. And like our point of difference, I guess, and this is the A team up here. I said that in the email back to Greg when I saw who was there. We can all face off to you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We can all face off to your problems pretty much, but where we play in particular is strategic. You wouldn't come to us to design landfills. You wouldn't come to us to do technical design of your facilities. We can go master planning, strategic work. We're doing a lot of work with New South Wales EPA for a moment around infrastructure needs, for example. And then a little bit into the circular economy, so kind of value chain, supply chain mapping work at national and industry scales.
Thanks, Richard. Mike?
It is excruciatingly uncomfortable to be sitting up here having this conversation. Mike Ritchie, science background, business background, started life as a marine biologist, became a political advisor, went overseas to study. My partner moved to Sydney and I jumped into, first job I could get was director at Liverpool Council of Environment. So did my time in local government, jumped down into the waste recycling sector for 25 years, became a rooster, went from rooster to feather duster in 8 minutes with the general manager of Suez, who said, thanks, your time is done. What am I going to do now? All right, let's go and set up a consultancy. It seems to be what you do. Had a coffee with Anne and said, how on earth do you do this? And she gave me some advice and I've been following it ever since. So we are, MRA is probably the minnow sitting here, definitely the minnow. We're 35 people, scientists, engineers, planners, one-stop shop for waste, recycling, circular economy. We're doing a lot of work around Australia, everywhere, and quite a bit in the Pacific. And like Richard, we're very similar skill set, strategy, policy, economics, right down to looking in bins, right up to national packaging guidance and policy settings, EPR, etc.
Good stuff. See, that wasn't that bad, was it?
Excruciating. They all know it.
That's the backstory. It's the backstory.
Hang on, who knew that Mike was a political advisor? See?
The marine scientists.
One thing. Righto, Mike. Miles?
I am definitely the junior partner here. I've been consulting for about 5 minutes. I joined SLR a year and a bit ago. So my background, I'm a civil engineer, fell into the waste industry about 2003 and just on a 1-month contract, helping out some environmental compliance at Lucas Heights in Sydney. And that was kind of continued. And then I had sort of about eight years with WSN, doing a whole range of operational projects, managing landfills, contracted GRL. Then 2011, an old mate of mine over in WA came knocking on the door, can you be the business development manager for this new waste to energy company? I thought, no, that sounds pretty exciting. And 8 years later of hard slog, we got the first large-scale commercially based waste to energy project across the line. That's still being built 5 years later. So, but we're a small developer, wearing the scars for a lot of challenging things, but really interesting. So, about a year and a half ago, our owners had run out of money, so it was time to look around. And I've always admired SLR as a very strong, ethical company. Very sort of technically orientated with a lot of sort of technical specialists supporting the EISs. We're about 40 process engineers in the UK. We're about 3,000 strong global company, about 850 in Australia. We have about 9 waste-specific professionals, and I get involved in sort of technical advisory for acquisitions, working for sort of banks and things like that for technical advisory, involved in landfill design, transfer design, AD, the whole kind of gamut, and a bit of strategy as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Miles. Okay, so you know who these guys are. And look, I think part of the idea of talking a bit more about consultants generally is they've had a bad rap, in the government sector in recent years, particularly in Canberra. And I think it's important that we explain or try to understand, what they add. So one of the first things I'd like to ask these guys is, how do they add value to the waste management industry? I mean, how do you add value? Because ultimately, that's what, you just take whoever would like to answer, but how do you add value to the industry?
Well, I think we cut a lot of bullshit out is the main thing. We know what works and what doesn't work because we've been around long enough. It's all about experience and, as Anne said, networks. If you don't know the answer, you can quickly get it. And there is a lot of misinformation, mythology in this sector that's just wrong. And it's important that someone is at least calling out the bullshit and saying, don't invest in that because you're going to go broke, or don't invest in that because it's going to be regulated out of existence, or yes, that's a great business plan, here's the pathway to get it implemented. And it's really just about being more efficient. We're the grease in the wheels, And in many of I'm sure it's true of everyone here, that when you go into the bigger policy space, you don't actually ever know where you're going to end up. It's like a frog jumping from lily pad to lily pad, and you just follow the data and follow the maths. And that's very much our raison d'etre. Follow the maths, and then you'll end up with a good outcome. And unfortunately, there's many businesses and councils that don't follow the maths. They just have a view, we're going to go this way. And we all know, we've all seen the press releases of the minister standing up beside a project, announcing to great fanfare, and a year later, it's just gone. And you come to these conferences and you go, whatever happened to, And everyone here would have 50 we could name. Yeah. And just kind of, what a waste of money and effort and energy to just be spinning as an industry. And I've heard talks here today that in the last 3 days that I heard 15 years ago, and we just have not progressed. And if anything, if the consultants can do anything, it's to say, don't go there or do go there.
All right, that's a good point, I think. Ronan, what's your sort of experience? Obviously you've been in Ireland and worked over there. How do you think consultants add value?
Oh, I think it's, following on from what Mike said, I think it's really the expertise we bring to a particular challenge or a problem that a client may be dealing with, particularly a local government side of things. And we do a lot of work on the procurement side of things, and we were actually on the other side of the table with Miles in relation to the waste energy projects, which were really, bespoke projects at their time. But back to the more mundane, everyday sort of activities is that, a lot of local governments may be looking at finding a new landfill site. That's a generational type of project. They may be going into a new contract, collections process, and that's probably a decade-long process. And so some of the staff they might have at the time mightn't have any experience in that area. So while us as consultants may be dealing with those problems annually with a different project, different client. So really, I think how we really add value to the industry is that knowledge, those lessons learned along the way, because as we said, we're jumping between lily pads, I like that analogy. Sometimes we jump on the wrong one, but then we know which one's the wrong one and we back and we go again. And taking those learnings from the projects we do work on and bringing it to that project, because really what we are is trying to be trusted advisors and assist them make an informed decision. We mightn't always agree with that decision that clients make because there might be other things we don't know, but we're there to assist them make a decision, and that's really key from our side. And also from our side, something that we do preach a lot, particularly on our local government work, is we're here to service the people. Now, like a local government worker, you know, they're very community orientated. They're trying to get the best outcome for their ratepayers. What we see is that we're trying to assist them and make that decision, and really having that appreciation that we're there to actually service the communities is also something that we find, you know, that we hold quite strong to our, you know, our consultancy business.
Anyone else like to address that?
Yeah, you can put, this is on the record, I do agree with Mike. So,
Gail Sloan said yesterday she agreed with me on
so I just think that, so I think consultants give, most consultants certainly give fearless advice and frank advice to the client. So if we were in their shoes, what would we do? And sometimes that advice is not readily accepted, and sometimes it is exactly what the client wants to hear because they're being pressured into a political situation or a political decision's been made by people that are not technical, that are going on a whim of something that they think is the right thing, and they need a third party to come in and say, this is not right, but back it up with experience and knowledge and data and all the reasons why you need to kill this project off now before it gets too much momentum, because the further things go along, the harder it is to stop things. So I think we give a dose of reality of what is feasible and what's not, and open the pathways up to say, if you decide to go down this path, this is the bumps you're going to hit along the road, so be warned and be ready.
Super fast. Your comparison to the Big Four is, I think, interesting. There's more than 100 years of experience on this stage. Whenever we've followed on from a PwC commission or something, it's always with an unhappy client that we are backfilling. They kind of bring fancy processes and high-end costs, but I think what we bring is more than 100 years of experience.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever. It's just this massive, vast library of information that you've got access to, and I think definitely integrity and professionalism is really, you know, is in contrast to what we've seen in the industry in other areas. So.
Are there any comments or questions at this stage from anyone? Like to clarify anything? Talable?
Good to see a good bunch of consultants sitting in front of me, and I have used all of them. So yeah, the important thing now for councils who are using consultants and why and how they are contributing from our perspective. So councils have various departments for planning, operation, whatever. So sometimes they do not have enough resources. They think, or councils think, there are short-term projects. We don't want to employ someone. And better to get someone for short time that is on consultancy basis and get the best outcome. They have experience, they have knowledge, they have done work for other organizations, so they can bring value there. So as council, probably we can get better value. We do not need to employ long-term employee for certain projects.
Yeah, I think that idea of resourcing is a critical one because, you know, the federal government has been saying that there's a brain drain out of government into consulting. But, you know, so I think the key thing is to try and understand what consultants can add to the industry. So, yeah, thanks, Talable.
Yeah, no, my last point is now, after that the central governments, federal governments issues with consultants, Now, it is becoming more and more difficult for local government to employ consultants. We have to go through a lot of process. So to employ one consultant, we need minimum 2 months. It depends what size of the project. It can be 3 months. So we want quick support, but no longer that is the case. Using consultant becomes now a big thing. ICAC issue and all issues. My question to the panel is how you think you can improve your reputation and help councils to employ you guys quickly.
Okay, did you get that question? Anyone like to have a crack at that? Did you say improve reputation so that councils can hire you more quickly? Do you think
Yes.
it's a reputational
So,
thing?
Now it's reputation issues, federal government, what you hear from tax.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so there
Is it, okay, well, I think we've got the gist of it. So,
I would say, yeah, the PwC issue with the, releasing confidential information, it's a bit of a one-off, and it's going to certainly smack the big four in the head, but it doesn't really translate to waste management, technical issues, business cases, etc. I'm not seeing any effect of it. I think in terms of recruiting consultants, put together a brief, put it out to quotes, and we'll be there. I mean, we are so much more efficient than employing someone on $100,000 a year and then training them up for 2 years before they finally get their head around what the project is they've got to get to, and then get to do it. It astounds me how often councils employ people when they could get the same result for half the money, a third of the money in a fifth of the time. It's amazing. And I'm not quite sure why that is. I think that might be a legacy issue. But yeah, certainly don't put MRA in the same box as PricewaterhouseCoopers. I haven't traded any confidential information for the tax office recently, I don't think.
I've got nothing particular to offer to go into with that. I'm not finding a decline in opportunities for us, so I don't know how you are responding as clients to that issue, but certainly the technical need remains acute. There's a lot going on in the industry, so I don't feel the need that I need to be defending or responding to PwC at all.
do you think with employment generally, where it's at in Australia, organisations will struggle to find their own people and therefore they need to outsource more?
Yeah, I think that's right, Greg. It is hard to find. It's hard to find people to hire into our businesses. I'm sure you're finding the same thing. I poach as much as I can from the likes of your organisation. So there definitely is a skill shortage across the board, and there's so much going on in our sector that requires depth of understanding and breadth of perspective that finding people is definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
And just to add to that point too, a lot of the stuff we get involved in is not the day-to-day stuff. It's more the projects change, infrastructure, services change that, people that are looking at it day-to-day don't generally have time to do. So using consultants to assist with change is, there's a big demand for it. As we see, we're getting more and more tender opportunities because there is so much happening in the industry, be it infrastructure, be it services. So, recognising how best to deliver those changes is a true consultancy or a full FTE. I agree with some of the comments here, is that use consultancies because we have that expertise. We've helped others on that change journey as well.
Can you give us, we can just go a little bit sideways on this issue because I think it's beneficial, but can you give tips on when an organisation is looking for a consultant, can you give a tip on the best way to go about that, the most efficient way to go about it? Because of course you'd see a lot of processes, you'd see a lot of situations of opportunities offered up, some come to nothing. So what would you do in that situation? How would you frame that request for tender to get a consultant?
Yeah, happy to have the first crack if people are okay with that. For us, look, and obviously we're tendering like everyone up on this stage. with us, it's really, sometimes you find that the actual client has a particular idea of how to deliver that work, i.e. that outcome, where sometimes you're putting in responses that you're like, we don't really need that, to be honest with you, but I better, because it's a conforming tender issue and all the rest of it. And local government procurement is hard. Many people don't go next to near it because it is so unique. For us, it's always the best tenders that we're responding to is when it's actually outcome based. I want X. How we get to X, you guys figure out, use your wisdom, use your knowledge.
So an
and experience.
outcomes-based
Outcomes
request.
basis, yeah.
Yeah.
Usually the best, makes it life easier for us that we can then put forward how we would approach it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's really useful, I think, to the audience, I imagine.
So I think a lot of times you get a phone call from someone who's got a problem. I need some help. This is a problem. Is this something that you can help me with? What are the things I need to think about? And so the person's actually sort of trying to understand what it is that they need, because they sometimes don't understand. And is that something that you can offer, or who should I be talking to? So that way then the scope of works that comes is actually tailored to what they need, because obviously they're having this conversation with multiple people to try to figure out, is this, who's got the skills and what is it that I need? And we can then help tailor what that person really needs, because often what they ask for is not really what they need.
Yeah.
And so it's a way of trying to educate them in a way to put the scope of works of what they really need, rather than something else that is not really what they want.
Do you find at all much these days of getting reverse briefs?
Exactly where I was going, Greg. Not that much from local government. I find it's much more from private sector, I think, given the procurement rules, so that's not surprising. But I really like that model where you kind
Maybe
of
explain a bit more what
the reverse brief. So you have a conversation as Anne, thank you. We're talking about, you then respond, this is how we would approach that in kind of dot point form, with just enough detail into the methodology without going too far. And then you can workshop that and you get an agreement then around the scope, the outputs, and how it would be approached. And you end up with something that is very fit for purpose for them, very aligned, you can deliver that. So it's a great way to kind of really help them tease out, to Anne's point, what their objectives are, what the scope is, and what the delivery is.
Do you find that, Mike?
Yeah, definitely. Reverse briefs are common. The other one we do a lot of with councils as well, they're trying to understand it, just doing hourly rates up to a cap of 5 or 10 grand, just to understand the project. Then, of course, council's tendering rules kick in, it goes out to tender, and you may or may not be conflicted as the person who helped council develop that, but that's normal, we all know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an easier way to engage than council going off to write up a brief that, as Anne said, can be often wrong. It's the wrong question asked the wrong way.
Yeah.
It's not easy for local government. It's much easier for the private sector, because you just have the chat and get on with it. Local government are caught up with the panels and the minimum tendering rules, etc. But I would definitely suggest, have a coffee. I'm sure everyone on this platform has plenty of coffees for free to try to just help the scope develop properly, at least in the right direction, before council goes off and invests for 3 months developing the brief.
Yeah. Miles?
Look, the only thing I'd add is just try and get terms and conditions that are sensible for consultancy. Sometimes you try to retrofit T&Cs that are building a toilet shed, not consultancy services. So just get that done, and saves a lot of time and hassle.
Just sign my contract.
That's what we'd like to do typically, but
Yeah.
that's not always the case.
Any other questions or, yeah? Maybe just introduce yourself too.
Hi, my name is Melody. I'm from Sphere Infrastructure Partners, so I'm also a consultant. I just wanted to make a comment and a question. I think we also have to be very honest with ourselves as consultants that there's the institutional capacity and the level of complexity and specialism that comes with a Big Four firm, and even the mid-tier firms are absolutely unmatched. I say this because I started my career at a Big Four firm, then I moved to a mid-tier firm and then a smaller one. And I've loved my experience throughout. I can see the benefits of the Big Four, and I can also see the bigger benefits of also a smaller, leaner firm and how agile and efficient it can be. I suppose my question to all of you is, with the wealth of experience that you bring, And given that there will continue to be, even larger specialism, larger clients, more complex projects that, other clients are going to be inclined to continue with the bigger firms, how do we feed the specialism, the experience, and the value add of a smaller firm to compete against the larger firms? Because that's what we're running businesses and it's competition. So how do you continue to add value to your clients, stay relevant, and be specialist in your area against the backdrop of a firm that's done off-water in the UK, Severn Trent, and all of that? Thank you.
Who's the smallest? Are you the smallest one?
I think I am.
So my suggestion would be that you form consortiums. You work with other you've got your expertise, so we know who's got expertise in what particular areas, and we basically go to you with a consortium of expertise and different consultancies to deliver the project, whatever it is. If it requires a skill set that we don't have, then you form a consortium to deliver it, if that's a project that you want to be involved in, with the client that you want to work for.
I also do think that, particularly a lot of clients recognise those bigger players are chasing those bigger projects when they can bring in 100 engineers to work on a road design and those big, alliance type projects. Well, they might have some wasties there, but it won't be like the waste expertise of the smaller and mid-level firms. So there is a big difference there. I think that's well recognised in the market.
Yeah, I mean, you play the infrastructure procurement game, and that is one where I think there is a pull to those big four in particular. And then Sphere, BDO was in another one who plays in that sort of infrastructure procurement space. So I agree with Anne. In that space, we'll bring the technical weight of technology, of feedstock analysis, of commercial aspects into the industry of feedstock accessibility. And then they're going to bring in more of that procurement model expertise, and we can play into that a little bit. But I think we stay in our lane to the extent that, and then you build people an alliance around the sides of that. In outside the infrastructure piece, I got to say we're not finding a lot of competition from that. I've been working with federal government on eco design, on curbside collection harmonisation nationally. New South Wales EPA on infrastructure needs assessments. No one's going to the big four for that sort of stuff. So I think it's very horses for courses as to where they're playing.
I want to reinforce that. I think for the infrastructure, the big four have a role. When it comes to waste policy, and even the common stuff like the economics of waste, they're so traditionalist, they actually get it wrong most often. Like the supply and demand curves, just to be technical for a moment, this is a service industry. We're not a commodity industry. They think in those big four get the economics wrong most often because waste is unwanted, it's surplus, it has negative value. And so all their theory about supply and demand and market forces is generally wrong. And they generally misallocate the priorities and the risks when it comes to things like national EPR schemes, national approaches. And it amazes me the federal government does go to them at all when they've got people like Richard, Miles and little MRA who know more. So what we often find when we work with the big four is we're teaching them. We're teaching them. I just finished a consultancy. It was $450,000 and MRA did at least 60% of the work and 90% of the intellectual input. And we got 50 grand out of a $450,000 project, and the big four got 400 grand. Why did they get it? Reputation, brand. That's what they bring to the table. And when you're the federal government with a limited skill set internally, faced with, the pushback from other parties, whatever political, they want a big brand. Richard luckily has that. Little companies like Anne and I, well, we just pick up the crumbs and walk amongst the dinosaurs and the elephants. So little mammal running around between their feet.
I think they got the idea. I just think, let's just stick with this for a second, because what is it about the big four? What you said earlier, they've obviously got benefits. when you worked in there, what is it that makes them different, and what is it that is good about them?
It's the training, simply that. It's the training, the dedication to excellence, and the capability to draw from absolutely anywhere in the world. If you come in there as a fresh graduate like I joined in Botswana, but I was able to get access to projects happening in India, Sri Lanka, America, and the UK. I'm just one of them. There's so much more, and I'm saying 30 years from now, I could be the next Mike or Miles or whatever. The point I'm making is they just have access and a wealth of resources, knowledge, information. They could be getting it wrong in other sectors, and I agree with you. But it's just that pull to understanding that they're there and they will get better, or they will recognize that, oh, we need to upskill in waste policy or whatever, and the gap still stays, or how do we compete effectively?
Are they interested as organisations in developing their own skills in some of these areas, or do you think they know where they sit, you know, in terms of what they're after?
I'm sure there's some partners in here who can speak to that. I don't know. Look, it's the strategy. Every firm is different, and they've got different priorities and a different strategy. And I won't be surprised if, you know, somewhere out there there's a closed door in KPMG and people are looking at how to break into the waste sector, and then, you know, they become employed by every city council in this country. So I'm just saying, we never know. I don't know where their strategies are, but the excellence and the ability to draw from the knowledge and the resources is what I noticed.
Yeah, well, I can comment on that. And you know, I think Etzela was quite strategic over the last couple of years around sustainability, and I was involved in 3 acquisitions last year, and these are intense processes, due diligence, and you've got a cast of 6 different advisors on legal and commercial. We did waste and technical. What was really interesting is PwC had 3 different packages of work, and it's easy for the private equity company to say, okay, I want you to do all this. It's much easier for me. But they're creeping into ESG. And for our company, that's a natural fit for us, because we have deep technical ability, deep understanding of climate. We're going, these guys they're really classy, but they don't have that depth. And so, we're sort of positioning ourselves to say, okay, you don't need to play in this area. This is our area, and we're happy to play with you in other areas. Like we worked with Ritchie and his team on 5 regional strategies last year, and we had PwC before they were, toxic, and that worked fine. So it's definitely we can, but you've got to know your area and push back in some of those areas because they will creep in. Sure.
Right, thanks, Miles.
I'm Peggy. I'm from the Shire of Coolgardie down in WA. I work with a lot of consultants as well. I'm just want to tell you consultants that we do trust your experience and your knowledge, but how can we hold you accountable if you have given me an advice and it doesn't work, and I try to follow up and I'm being told that the person that you were dealing with left the organization and now I have to pay again for that same job to be done? How can we hold you guys accountable? Thank you.
Okay.
Someone else can answer that one. I've been here long.
The easy answer is partial payments. You get what you want. When the job's finished, you pay your partial payment at the end. And if they're a brand like ours that are in the market for 15 years, we've been doing this now, our brand matters. You've got nothing else in consultancy. It's very hand-to-mouth. You've got nothing else in legacy terms than your brand reputation. So if we stuffed it up, and I'm sure it's true of everyone on this panel, if we stuffed it up, we'll be back there to fix it, even if that person has left the company. And as an owner of a company, Anne is an owner, that is what we get riled up about, is if our staff have let down a client and I'm getting the phone call, that's the death of a company. So, brand reputation matters a lot.
Yeah, great. It's reputation and it's relationship. And if you burn the relationship, then you're never going to work with them again. And then, everyone around you will hear your experience, and you know, as it was said this morning by the EPA person who's just joined, it's like we're a small community. I think also problems are also an opportunity. So we always lean into that sort of thing. If there's something, we've got something wrong, or you need to, something to be revisited, even if it's a different person that is no longer in the organisation, it's a great opportunity for someone new to establish a relationship with you and to create another trusted relationship. So we learn in on those sorts of opportunities.
Pergy, I'd like to think you're not talking about Talis Consultant Services, because we're obviously doing a lot of work with you at this moment in time. So that's, as a business owner too, you haven't rang me, which is good, so you weren't. But as we spoke about earlier, and this is for all of us, we've got to mind our turf. And as we said, other people trying to come in, the bigger four coming in. And of course, there's some consultancies that got out of waste altogether. We've seen that happen in Australia in a big way. It's happened internationally in a big way, because it doesn't bring in the sexy projects for some of those people sometimes. So it's very important that we are servicing our clients and keep them happy, because there's nothing easier than doing repeat work for an existing client.
And I guess our motto is you're only as good as your last report. So that's the thing I keep saying to the staff is, every report, every client is as important as the previous one, because nobody remembers a great report. Somebody will remember a poor report. So the advice you give has to be spot on. It has to be evidence-based. So it's got to come, you've got to collect all of the information. I guess what sometimes can happen is circumstances change, or something comes to left field. A classic example was, I was giving advice or had a strategy for Norfolk Island, and we were basing the decisions that we made on shipping out of Australia, and nobody ever thought that the shipping to Norfolk from Australia, given it's an Australian territory, would stop, and it did. And all of a sudden, we weren't allowed to export the waste to New Zealand. It had to be flown, exported $1 million a year back to Australian mainland. No one saw that coming, absolutely, and everybody was scrambling. So circumstances, events can happen that you just do not think about in terms of a risk profile. No one had that on their agenda. We failed that, but nobody else thought about it either. So sometimes extenuating circumstances can happen, and you've all got to go back to the drawing board together and try to work out what are we going to do about it.
Not a question, but I think just a comment. I've done project management and business improvement in private and in local government, and I think we constantly hear in local government, oh, this consultant, they sort of fell over in these couple of areas, and I'm often astounded that feedback was never sort of passed on to the consultant, or there's no sort of KPI tracker implemented in monthly invoicing payment processes. And I think as local governments, we need to do that a little bit better. This, again, not a question, but I just think weaving like a KPI tracker for quality, technical, and the timeliness of the work into your sort of monthly conversations with the consultant, it makes the quality of the work and sort of protects the risk that councils have by putting this sort of work out there.
Do you think a performance review at the end of consultancies might address that?
You do a performance review at the end of a project,
yeah.
So it makes sense to do a performance review at the end of a consultant engagement. But you got to establish that that's going to be the case from the outset and implement that practice throughout the whole engagement.
Is that happen at all with any of you guys?
Well, yes. On some of our bigger projects, we'll be having progress reports and performance reviews on a monthly basis. Where are we at, where are we going to? I think a key point is to go back, and we're seeing more and more local governments use this. As a business owner, we don't really like it, but milestone payments based on key deliverables. And of course, we always want to have a discussion that says, let's try to make this as fair as we can, that if it's a $100,000 project, we're not getting that in 6 months' time, because obviously we've had all the cash flow associated and expenses associated with getting to that point. But that's something we've worked, with a lot of our local governments now is on milestone basis. So they understand that, yes, we delivered the draft report, or we've done the initial site assessment, or whatever it is, and they can see it, it's tangible, and then they can, support the payment of those invoices. So I think, also too, from your side, understand what your concerns are from a local government in relation to performance of consultants, and let's build it into the contract, and let's have discussions around that as we go.
And just in terms of, do you have a closeout meeting at the end? probably less often than more, I would say. Larger projects where might have been going for a year or more, where we've got a pretty trusted relationship and deep relationship, you're quite likely to do it. If it's a shorter project than that, then it seems like my experience is it's not that common.
Yeah, I mean, our quality system requires it, and I think probably it's on the back end of the projects. Probably, we have a lessons learned internally, but that feedback mechanism is always offered, but I think it's not really diligently followed up, and I think that's a good point.
Just sort of connected to this somewhat, is price the biggest issue, or where do you see price fitting in your engagement for consultants, particularly from, say, a council point of view? Are they looking for best value for money or just best value, or how do you see that?
It's far more flexible in the commercial sector, obviously. You just have a handshake and do the deal and paperwork follows. But in council land, there's always a money element. There is nothing worse than coming a close second, and it's happened to all of us, and you then go scratch your head and go, what didn't we do? And most often it comes down to money. And that's very disappointing, but that's the nature of the local government sphere. Not nearly as tight in state and federal governments. They tend to have more play money and less observation of their own probity rules. So they just seem to have more degrees of freedom. But local government, it's the hardest environment for sure in terms of getting the balance between price and technical experience right, for sure.
So there's a question up.
Just quickly on that, what you get in that thing, I'd never understand why price is in the evaluation criteria. I think that's pass-fail. It's over your budget or it's not. If it's under your budget, then chase value after that, right? If it's under your budget, it's under your budget, and a $5,000 saving versus somebody else is not material in the scheme of things. At that point, you're chasing everything else that is going to be critical to that project.
You had a question up there?
Hi, thank you. Donna Shield from Tonkin and Taylor. I'm a consultant also, but new to it actually. I just want to know from each of you what the hardest part of consulting is for each of you. And if you had some advice from folks who are new to consulting from local and state government background, what would it be?
Well, the hardest part of consultancy is definitely the timesheets.
Agree.
Something we all love. It's, as Talis has grown, Talis is now a big firm. It's 120 people. 13 years, there was 4 of us sitting around the table. It's multidisciplinary. It really, what's been fantastic is now we're a national firm and we've got some great wasties on the East Coast, and we're continuing to grow that. Just the hardest thing from our side of things, or the thing that's probably took more effort, is just making sure that people are coming in are feeding into our culture. And I know that's sometimes people, is that really what you think? No, it is. It's very so important, because they come in, they're breeding our values. They understand our services, understand what we can do well, what we can't do well, where we need a partner, and we've partnered with some of the people up in this room here too. So yeah, really just bringing in that next people into the organisation and helping to grow the business further. And as a consultant, one thing we always say to them, it's hard work. It is hard work. You got to be technical. You've got to have strong relationship skills, get on well with people, strong communications. You got to fight for the work. You got to be strong on BD, and you got to be a good project manager as well. So it's multidisciplinary, really. So it's not an easy gig, I suggest.
Timesheets. Just a second. I think one of the things we're finding is just the really importance of mentoring new people into the business, and we've got some really, really smart people who've come. We've got some out of academia, and just bridging what that looks like in the consulting world. Because in academia you could spend 10 weeks on a little analytical problem, but mate, you're not going to get paid for that, buddy. Come on, So just trying to really teach the young ones what's consulting about. It's I think we're finding that challenging. It's and I don't know. It's probably a deeper thing about what they're teaching at university. Is really smart, analytical, but it's that street smarts kind of. Well, how does this really work practically? I had a young person with me at a facility, and she's writing up a report and there's all these forklifts. I say, no, there wasn't any forklifts, there were excavators actually. You know, so just that, but that's fine. She's never had that experience before. But that comes with time, and just having be quick to ask questions. Often these guys think they have to do it by themselves rather than bouncing off, hey, well, what do I do here? Quickly, and then that saves a lot of time.
In our experience, they're smart. In terms of recruitment, we look for smart people in any aspect of life who are committed. And generally in our space, commitment to the environment and sustainability is a great launching pad because it is a hard job. There's nothing easy about consulting. But if they're smart and they're prepared to learn, then I generally say within 2 years, you're going to move on to some well-paid professional job if you want to, or you stay in the trenches with us consulting. But you've got to be quick. You've got to be able to read the room and read a client and try to join the dots, jumping the lily pad to help the client get to the other side of the lake. And it's not ever a simple pathway in our experience, you know, particularly if it's a big question about policy or setting up a governance arrangement or setting up something that no one's ever done. And that's the really exciting thing about consulting is you get to work on problems that no one's ever done before. It's fantastic. So it's really exciting if you've got that mindset. Otherwise, it's just a grind. And we lose most young people to government because they go, it's just too hard. You know, it's so on and off and on and off. And when it's off, it's BD. You know, there's no off. If you don't have enough work, go and find one. So it's on always. It's just a different on.
I think another useful question to ask the panel now is, you know, technology and AI. How do you see that coming in? Because obviously everyone in their workplace is thinking, you know, how's it going to influence what I'm doing? But how will it influence consulting, do you think?
I don't think it will, in any great sense. If we're doing the work for council, there have been various people who've tried to automate data. In any strategy, we spend 50% of the strategy time sorting out their data, particularly for local government. So unless AI can fix misallocation of data and just an absence of, you know, massive gaps in data that have to be filled in before you can even start to write the strategy, I can't see AI ever coming in and just skimming over the top. And we've had a couple of IT companies try and do that. You might remember a few years ago, coming in and saying, just dump your Weybridge data to us and we'll automate your strategy. Well, yeah, how long did that last? You know, it didn't. And I think AI is something similar. It'll skim along the top, but it won't do anything of use.
Yeah, agreed. It's a deep dive, isn't it? Probably where ChatGPT or etc. might play is, you know, you can ask the first order questions, and you can kind of start layering it in. But our experience is that you can't get to the ultimate answer because ultimately it needs experience and insight. It needs context. You need to be able to draw from different perspectives more broadly. So it can take you halfway to an answer, you know, absent the data question, etc. But you know, at high level, and then you need someone to take it forward for you.
Look, it may play a role in sort of low-risk, repetitive tasks, you know, and that plays a part, obviously, in contracting and all those kind of things. But, you know, there's a lot of actual thinking that goes into what we do. So it can't be replicated very well.
The only place I see it, and we're doing some work in this, is auditing. You know, AI for photo recognition of waste and just take out the costs of auditing. So, Anne, you know, you and I are going to lose parts of our business at some point, but it's certainly not happening quickly. You know.
Funny you should say that. We're actually thinking very similar. Talis has used a lot of AI in our other sections, asset management and noise. And in the asset management side of things, video recognition, lasers on roads, it goes above my head. The NAIRs look after that. And of course, there's been some discussions about how we could apply it to an auditing setting, but the variability of the waste, you know, is key. So, yeah, I think waste is just too variable, you know, and Excel is a fantastic tool and it's so flexible because we need it to be flexible because the data we get is so poor at times that just we spend most of our time, as Mike said, just getting into a usable manner. So Yeah, I'm not sure AI is going to be hitting the waste industry in the consulting industry too much at this stage.
I'm not worried about AI taking my auditing business away when I've got a team that can sort 74 categories to the final bottleneck for what is distributing millions and millions of dollars in the industry. I think the industry would prefer to have it manually counted than to rely on AI with a tolerance of plus or minus whatever when there's millions of dollars at stake. I think where technology is coming in and about data is that we will need to come up with better, smarter ways of interpreting the data, a better user interface to see the data and to be able to get quick insights like the dashboard for the New South Wales C&I project. That's, I think, where we will see better data, better technology use than trawling through 800 pages of hard copy reports and charts and tables. That's where I think dashboards, to help data interpretation and quick, ready access to what is happening. I think that's what we will see. I don't think AI is going to be the solution.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions regarding technology?
While you're thinking about it, I just love the strategy work where you say to a council, you will write to strategy, just send us your data reports, and you get literally the 800 pages of faxed, 1970s data sent to you, and you kind of go, what the? How on earth am I going to make sense of this? And maybe 3 reports that were written by SLR or Talis 4 years ago, and someone else's report, and they say, right, now we need a corporate strategy for waste management. We need it in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. They're great gigs. They're exciting, but man, oh man, the data is just awful for, what, 50% of strategies?
Yeah.
With regard to the AI, Marie Marshall, WSP, not the Big Four, just big. We're finding that the Big Four are using AI to write a lot of feasibility studies, and when you read them and you're asked to give an opinion on them, they're atrocious. So be really careful about the AI-generated reports. But what AI will not replace is a relationship, right? You having that coffee, you sitting down with that client and actually having a true discussion about the service you require, AI will not replace. And so you need to play, especially local government, put even more importance into requesting meetings and workshops into your specifications and your scopes so that you can actually build those relationships, because AI will never replace that.
Thank you. In this last part of our time that we've got allocated, I wanted just to put up a scenario, and I sent this in advance to our esteemed panel here. So if you wouldn't mind throwing this slide up. So what I asked is, and this is a typical sort of question that a lot of councils in particular might come across, and I thought by doing this, you might just get a sense of prioritising and how these guys might think about approaching problems like this. And there's no right and wrong way. It's just, it's interesting to see how a consultant might look at this, where the pinch points might be, how they see they could tackle this sort of problem. Particularly, and this is not an uncommon thing in the labour market that we have, when you get junior staff landed into a job and they're overwhelmed, this is exactly where I think consultants can help. So, Anne, maybe if you wouldn't mind starting what you think about how you tackle what's happening.
Okay, so a poor cash-strapped regional New South Wales council. Yeah. That's where we're starting. So I guess given this scenario, what I think they need is a 10-year plan of from where they are to where they need to get to. And so they need a master plan about their infrastructure, about their services. They need a strategy, a plan on a page, something that they can easily refer to, that's easily digestible, easily understandable, an action plan with some priorities and timeframes and targets, an implementation plan and a budget. They need to know what their risks and their issues are, and they need a communications plan. And the communications plan has to be to the EPA about their compliance and how they're going to deal with that. It's got to be to the council, the elected representatives, and during that time there's going to be new representatives that come in and old ones that will leave. So you've got to keep refreshing that communications plan to keep the elected representatives with you, because they are ultimately your bosses and the decision makers, and you've got to keep the community informed as well. So if this was my scenario, I'd be going out there for a site visit, doing some deep listening, which is what Tony talked about yesterday, getting copies and getting information about where are you now and how did you get to where you are, because how you get to where you are now very much can inform as to how easily it is to go forward, if they've just stumbled along to get to here, or whether there's been some drastic decision as to where they're at. I think you then do a discussion paper to council, because you need to get council on board with this process. So a discussion paper to council to tell them fair and frank advice. You have major EPA compliance issues which you need to deal with as a priority. You need to extend your council collection contract while you're looking at other options, and you need to get a strategy done to work out where you're going to go with a 10-year plan, and a 10-year plan of how you're going to improve or increase the domestic waste management charge from where it is to where it needs to be. You need to take them on the journey. You've got to take the community on the journey, but fundamentally you've got to take the council on the journey. And I think in this scenario, you've also got to take the council officer on the journey, because they're young, inexperienced, and they're confronted by everything and don't know where to start. So once you've done the discussion paper and the council says, yes, let's get the EPA off our back and let's keep going, then you can research your options, you can put an options paper together, you can take that to the community, find out what their willingness to pay is, find out what their priorities are they aligned with what you think they are in the options paper. Again, take that options paper and the community consultation back to council to say, this is what your community think about what these options are. Do you agree? Educate and get them on the train as well, and then basically put together a final sort of document. So it all sounds like it's a lot of work, and it is, but it can be tailored so it's fit for purpose. So what you would do for a small country regional council is not what you would be doing for a metropolitan council. So you tailor it to suit the circumstances, to suit the time frame, to suit the budget, but you have to take the officer and the council and the community on the journey. Otherwise, it becomes your plan and not the community's plan.
All right, thanks, Anne. Ronan, maybe there'll be some of the similar things you do, but maybe you can focus on the differences of how you might look at that.
Top answer, Anne, I think, is as most people thought, when we prepared for this presentation, I thought we'd all have similar answers. I'd probably have a quick chat with them initially and say, mate, you want to think about your CV and maybe applying for another job, because you're in a fair predicament. Or if you do see all that through, give me your CV, because I'd like you to join Talis. Of course, we've been in the situation where they haven't had all that issues on their plate. They've had a few. Probably a key one, obviously, the big risk item up there, assuming we can't get an extension to the contract, is what are we going to do with collections? And as we're writing that collection specification, I think the other key question I'd be asking as well is, you're running out of landfill space, but do you need landfill space? Do you want to keep running a landfill particularly if it's only small, it's only 10,000 tonnes? And as we work through that, what you call that residual waste strategy, because, if you don't know what you're doing with residual waste in 10 years, be it regional, be it metro, you need to start peddling and peddling fast. If they are a regional council like that, we've jumped into many northern New South Wales councils of late, and some of 5,000 tonnes, we need a new landfill. So, mate, are you sure about that? Because the costs associated with that, because if you're running at 10,000 tonnes or 100,000 tonnes, your operational costs are so similar, and that's 10 times that cost. So we've been doing a lot of asking questions on that factor. And when you're building that residual waste strategy, is use the procurement process to assist with some of those answers. So you may approach industry to see if they got a solution for you, or you may be trying to entice other regional councils, because in a position, so your neighbouring councils, but in a position like that, you do need to be speaking to your neighbours, because they could have similar issues, but there could be solutions that they can bring to the table. So for me, tackling the procurement side of things and really figuring out what you're going to do with your landfill is the top critical items on the issues, the many issues above.
That's good, thank you. Richard?
Look, they're two really good answers, and I don't think we're much between us on all of that. So maybe just a couple of other reflections. In terms of that action plan sequencing, getting clear on which is the most critical, and then rippling down. I mean, we both kind of talked to that. Landfill compliance is an environmental and health issue. That's pretty critical. FOGO service transition is down the track. The domestic waste management charge can fall out of the back of once you've made other choices, right, around what are you doing with your landfill, what are you doing with your FOGO service configuration, and when are you transitioning? So, rippling through then to kind of financial analysis at the bottom to say, okay, what's that impact on your
and your domestic waste management charge, and then you can put it back out to willingness to pay to your community. So that's some of the sequencing I would be thinking about in consultation with the officer. Probably small regional council, country council, you don't want any of the expensive people up here on the project, all right? We're going to burn the budget. You know, you didn't give us a budget, Greg, but I'm betting it's not a big budget. So you've got to wrap the right team around it, this project. So someone with the right level of experience who can draw all this stuff together, but who can spend the time building a relationship with this new waste manager. And then those people who can do the analysis and devote enough time to a constrained budget with quite a lot of package of works.
Good tips, Mike.
Agree with all that sequencing stuff. I'll just add a couple of colour and flavour. We would generally try to start with a meeting with the councillors and the executive staff. Some of you may recall the New South Wales government put out a strategy for how local government should develop a strategy. It was like 60 pages. The contents page had 3 really good lines in it, which we adopt. Where are you now? Where are you trying to get to? And how are you going to get there? And those 3 rules are the guide for strategy making, and then everything falls from that. And we would generally set up and say, here's what's coming. There's a workshop. We'd say, here's what's coming federally, state, local, emissions trading, blah, 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 blah. Get the councillors out of the tactical and the implementation and get them up at the higher, what are we trying to achieve here? Why are we doing this? And then all the stuff follows in terms of the implementation and the reports. And the one thing I particularly agree with Talis for regional local governments with landfill problems is what is the true cost of landfilling? We do not have an institutional requirement for landfill owners in Australia, and particularly regional local government, to actually understand their cost base. And our starting position is, you run an airport? Yep, we run an airport. Right? You've got a board, a CEO, a business case, a business plan, dividend payments, da-da-da-da. Why aren't you running your landfill in exactly the same way as that? Why do you run it like the local charity down the road? I mean, it's a landfill asset. It's probably one of the most important economic assets in your region, and you're filling it up willy-nilly. And so we've got to get that mindset around what is the full cost of landfilling and what are we trying to achieve here? And you've got multiple options. You could run the cheapest waste service system known to man and just bury everything in trenches. Right? And that's fine. And if that's what you're pitching to your community, I'm fine with that. We will say that. But if you're also trying to achieve circular economy targets and material sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions reduction, then that comes at a cost to a little trench landfill down the road. So councillors, which way do you want to go? And if you don't have that buy-in really early on, then all your tactics just get noisy and messy and you're constantly having a debate. So you need to get them up and out of the tactics and into the goal setting early, and then everything else has been said, I agree with.
Yeah, so it's almost like a ditto. A couple of thoughts around just the role that consultants have played for me in my career. Like when I started WCN, I remember some of really experienced guys like David Gamble and Stuart Deaver, and they kind of helped me get through a procurement exercise to get a gas field in at Thornlea down in Sydney, and then helped me with Grange Avenue, which is a sort of a rehab site, and they kind of sort of took me by the hand. And I think there's a role that consultants need to take with the junior officer, and as Mike said, you get the councillors in, but you're kind of helping that junior officer communicate internally. That's a really important thing. And I think the other thing is you just have to be really frank about the brief. Like if you've got a budget, sounds like there's not a lot of money, you may not be able to deliver everything he wants or she wants. And so you just have to have that conversation up front and say, well, we'll do this first stage and then see how that goes. So I think that's just a couple of things.
I think, in councils in particular, understanding the politics is certainly relevant. As Mike said, his approach obviously reflects his background as well, to try and tackle the top of the tree to start with and get them understanding what the problem is. And of course, listening. One of the other things that does happen in regional areas is these regional waste groups exist in New South Wales, in most other states, I believe. And so harnessing them and trying to understand what their objectives are, because some are more active than others, and this idea of regional landfilling might be resolved that way. Talbot, did you have a question?
It's not a question, but going back to using technology, AI. So what you have been saying, I found, is the structure we know. This is what, but how to gather data, how to analyze data, that is the difficult point. This is where consultants spend a lot of their time. So if you could use AI could pull out policies and data where they are, and even from specific council, what they have done, what resolution they made. AI can pull out those like that, like GPT, for example. I'm not
like as backgrounding and reporting.
Yes, all background
I'm sure that happens anyway.
analysis is the important part,
Yeah.
the backbone of, say, what is the political orientation?
Yeah.
Say, what is the trend of political decision-making, political parties, and say, what in power, and so forth. In every aspect of strategy making, technically you can pull out quickly that information,
Yeah.
and then it will spit out some format, in some format, the information, and then you are the expert. You have your understanding, then you look into that, oh yeah, this doesn't fit, or there is a hole. So you interpret. So that, in my view, would cut down the time required for the whole process. And also it will be very close to the right thing, but maybe 20% not right. So this is what your job is. As expert thinker, you have seen something more, and then you can put that.
All right, that's a good point, I think, to take on board. Any comments on that?
I would never use ChatGPT to analyse anything for the reasons I've said before. And I think we're all very pragmatic. We go to the National Waste Policy and the commitments of government as our key drivers to say to a council that's perhaps stuck in inertia or in a historical view of we just run small, cheap landfills down the back and we don't do any of the things up on this board, we would say, well, these are the drivers that are coming at you, whether it's landfill levies or climate change, pricing, whatever. But we don't, I would never use ChatGPT. I would just set the council's performance in the context of what else is happening, the 80% targets, the 50% organics, the 10% reduction per capita. They're the important drivers. They're not legislated, by the way, Mr. Mayor, so you can ignore them if you want to run a cheap landfill. But here's where your council is performing relative to your neighbours. Yeah. That seems to be the only way to get traction. So it's definitely not an AI answer. It's the relativity. How good is this council compared to others on a journey? And honestly, if they want to run a cheap landfill and cheap arrangements, no problem. But you've at least got to cover your costs. So that's very local. It's not a ChatGPT answer.
Yeah.
We, probably most organisations have set Gale, we have an enterprise ChatGPT, which I've never used, to be honest, but we quarantine any technical information generated within Arcadis into our own ChatGPT platform because there's not an appetite to be sharing that widely. So, I know you'll have cost models for running MRFs or for landfills, as do we. We have feedstock modelling, developed models. I'm sure, Anne, you've got so much data you don't know what to do with it all, right? And this is not getting out into the broader world, which then ChatGPT needs to draw on to make some sense of it. So what you're going to end up is drawing on inferior, old data, giving you the wrong answer. And so I actually think that it'll get better over time, but it's a long way still from.
That's a very critical comment, I think. That's really important.
I think I've had some experience with a couple of councils who where the elected representatives did not understand, appreciate the ramifications of ignoring notifications from the EPA, and they bore the cost of that, and they paid the fines. So that's why I went back to the issue about you need to take the elected representatives on the journey with you, and they need to absolutely understand that compliance is number one and everything else is number two. And if they don't do that, then that's at their peril. But the last thing you need is for a small country council to get pinged by the EPA and have to pay some fine of whatever the amount of money is, because that money is what they desperately need to be using to try to fix up the problems they've got, not to paying into sort of state coffers. So, and yeah, I think those small country councils, they will struggle to get you the data, they'll struggle to get you the reports, they'll struggle to get you all the background information that you actually need. In the end, you end up speaking to a lot of people, having a lot of conversations, and that's where you glean where they've got to, how they are, where they are, and that gives you a sense of what you can do and how you can work with them to move forward.
Yeah. As I said in my introduction, we've got about 40 smaller councils or so online watching this today. So some of the reason this is put up is to help them as well. Look, I think, yeah, sure.
If I can. The other thing that consultant can do is be the cover person for the waste manager, and we're often brought in to help just line up the ducks with the senior management because they're not getting traction. And often it's an organisational issue, not a waste issue. It's about lines of communication and strategy and goal setting and confidence. And I'll often go in and do what I call our state of waste talk, just to get the councillors aligned with what the wastie is trying to achieve. And I wrote an article in Inside Waste last week about we often get wasties saying, if it was a contaminated site, if my landfill was registered on the Contaminated Lands Register, I'd get more attention from the councillors because I've now got the EPA climbing all over me and I can get the money to get the things done. And so I have suggested, sure, I mean, there's no reason that every landfill in New South Wales should not be on the Contaminated Lands Register and have EPA oversight. They are all contaminated lands. But that's the kind of role that a consultant can help play in just getting alignment throughout the organisation, because that is a real issue for most, particularly regional small councils. It's just a complete lack of alignment about what is the purpose of that landfill and FOGO and bin arrangements in yellow bin. You get the spectrum of views about the lack of alignment around what we're trying to achieve here.
Just some insights from a developer on regional councils. We tried to develop a project in northwest Western Australia, up at Carafa, Pilbara, Port Hedland, and it was really interesting how different Carafa and Port Hedland could manage that process. And I think it's just a really important understanding that the instability of one of those councils really torpedoed any ability for us as the developer to proceed with the project. And the other one was really stable, very good, and mayor had been there for many years, understood things, and that really helps. And I think that's perhaps a role that consultants can better do, is just help those sort of more dysfunctional players. And they're around. Sometimes they are dysfunctional, and that's just reality. So.
All right, thanks, Miles. Did we have any closing questions at all? Comments? Did you? Oh, sorry. No, you're right. Scratching your head.
Hi, Marcel from the New South Wales EPA. I'm sure many of you know the EPA employs a lot of consultants, and certainly I have and do and continue to do so in the future. And I think you guys do a great job, but I think one of the challenges I face, and I wonder whether local councils in the room feel the same way, sometimes we're chasing very niche pieces of information, knowledge out of your heads and your team's heads, and sometimes you have staff move on. So I think whether this is a word of advice or some feedback to you guys, like sometimes just, I know we're in the paperless society, but I'm old fogey. I like a brochure with what exactly your expertise are and what your what your areas of expertise are. I know many of you who you are, but a couple of you I don't know that well. So I think just reminding us, councils and state councils and state government, what your
Well,
skill sets are, capabilities,
capability
and yeah.
statements.
I mean, in the
Well,
old days we
updating
had
them.
brochures and you'd come to conferences and pick it all up. But you know,
Yeah.
we get a lot of new people in the EPA and they have to get a consultant in and they might not know who to go to. So just a bit of a reminder that still is very helpful for you guys.
What's the best way to send that out, do you think? Because obviously on websites it's probably regularly updated, but you need to be...
I find, for example, like in the Arcadis website, for example, which is a global website, like you don't have that granular information. So I wouldn't really, just because I know you, I know exactly where to go. But that's not helpful if I leave my job, as you can imagine. So yeah, I love brochures because I'm an old fogey. Like I just love the old style piece of paper, but that's not going to work. So I don't know. I'm hoping there are other... social media, whatever you use, but I don't use social media, so sorry, that's not going to help on me either.
I think that's a great comment.
Yeah, I'm old school. Let's catch up for a coffee.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's try and just wrap this up with just a comment from each of you, if it's okay, because I know we've got planes and whatever to catch, so maybe we'll try and...
Yeah, I haven't said something in a while, so I'll probably get some stick from the office later on. Look, as I said, I'm from Western Australia, not originally. But in Western Australia, one of the biggest things that when I arrived there 20 years ago, what I seen was being achieved by the regional councils in the metro and the regional areas was actually just a collaboration. Now, they were under formal regional councilmen's arrangements, i.e. the ownership of the waste was actually transposed onto the regional councils and big waste infrastructure projects were delivered. And I think that model is moving away because each council wants to make their own decision and set their own destiny. And now we're working with SS Rock at the moment, so South Sydney Regional Organisation of Council, on major procurement projects there in relation to CRESS, which is recycling, coming and recycling and processing. But a different model where we opt in and each council has the right to decide whether they want to go down that path or not. So there's two different models there, but the key, in Ireland and in the UK, regionalisation for waste management service is actually legislated. You have to work together for waste processing. I don't think, well, the West Australian government is absolutely scared, very scared, should I say, of upsetting local government. Of course, amalgamation was tried 10 years ago and didn't go anywhere. But regionalisation really, really works. It truly works. And other parts of the world, as I said, is legislated. So please do bear that in mind. Even in remote areas, there's still benefits to it. And in Western Australia, we've got some of the most remotest councils you can think of. But still, regionalisation does assist there. So, key take-home messages, and from my side, is that, yeah, regional councils are changing, particularly, as I said, in Perth, but the regional approach should not, it has so much benefits to it.
I think data-driven, evidence-based decision-making is what we all need to do, and I think taking away the subjectivity and the perceived expertise that people think they know what's happening when the data tells you something else. I just think we just need to go back to sort of real numbers that tell the real story, that's where we're at, and then how the hell are we going to get from here to where it is we want to go. And I think it's this is a fantastic conference in terms of networking and collaboration between everybody. But I share some of Greg's frustration. I think you said, or somebody said that, we're still talking about the same things, 10 years later, and there's inertia in many areas of the industry. There's fantastic advances in some, and then we're spinning our wheels in others. So, but it's a lovely, fantastic sector to be in, and it's always new and exciting, and there's always something dynamic happening. But this conference is absolutely one of the flagships of the industry. And so congratulations, Greg, for you putting this all together for so many years.
Indeed, your last one, I understand. Look, just quick reflection. I think it was mentioned before that relationship is at the heart of consulting. And I think that is a reflection back to you. I find that from a business perspective, the most interesting projects, the cheapest way to get a new project is to deliver the initial project really well, build that relationship, you then understand the organisation, you can co-create a scope, etc. So I think it's all really about relationship is at the heart of it. I don't have a big sector perspective, but I just wanted to kind of mention that as a key consulting aspect.
Thanks, Richard. Mike?
look, consultants are there to problem solve for councils, for clients. So if you've got problems, reach out. The first conversations are always free, and there's great expertise. Just ask. I mean, and one other comment to the other technical experts in the audience or watching online. Consultants need to constantly keep their information up to date. So if you've got new technology, new innovations or whatever that you know, make sure you tell us, because we're out there, you know, spread across the community. And here's a problem. We're going to FOGO, but we haven't designed a chute yet that can take a FOGO bag from a multi-unit dwelling down to the basement that doesn't explode. Now, someone come up with that and tell us all so we can solve it. That's the kind of thing consultants can do really easily. We can put a problem out there and find someone to come and solve it. So, and those conversations are generally for free. So, you know, use us, please.
Yeah, no, I think it's exciting, and you know, if I reflect on the last 10 years of developing waste to energy plants, the knowledge base has really increased in the consulting area and across the industry, and I think that's positive. I think that will come out in FOGO design and implementation of facilities. So I think it's a partnership. We're working together. There's a mentoring role we've got to play, and excited to be in this area.
Good stuff. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panel. And I'm sure if you need any advice or questions, they'll be happy to catch up with you at any time for that cup of coffee. And we are a little early, but I know a number of you have transport to catch, so thanks for your attendance this afternoon.